We're in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. If you weren't here with us last week, we just began the Joseph narrative. And really the Joseph narrative, really Jacob's sons and Joseph being the main star, will be what we study for the rest of the book of Genesis. It takes up the last 14 chapters of the book of Genesis. And we kind of zoom in on Joseph's life. We see the ups and downs and the different parts of his journey. Last week, we just did the first 11 verses there in chapter 37. And so far, we've learned about him. In chapter 37, he's 17 years old. We learned that he is the favored son of his father, Jacob, also known as Israel. At this point in his life, the Bible uses Jacob and Israel kind of interchangeably. It's not referring to the nation of Israel, so it may be confusing to you. I could see how that would be. But it's Jacob or Israel. The nation will become known as Israel eventually. But right now, it's still just a family. And there's 12 sons. Benjamin's the youngest son. Joseph's the second youngest. 10 older brothers above those two. And yet, Joseph is the favorite. It even says that Israel loved Joseph more than his brother. You don't have to guess whether he might be the favorite. No, he's 100% the favorite. And this absolutely enrages his older brothers. They hate him. They hate him because he is favored over them. And they can't stand it. And so, they can't even, it says they can't, so far in chapter 37, they aren't able to even speak peaceably to him. They can't say anything nice. They just absolutely hate him. We also see that Joseph is a dreamer and not smart enough to keep those dreams to himself. You know, that's the problem. He's a dreamer, and God has given him a wonderful revelation that his brothers are going to bow down to him, that he will lead his family, and he tells them that once, and they don't respond well. And he's not smart enough to not tell him again when he has that second dream. And it just fuels their hatred. You see it building to what's going to happen here in chapter 12. It's a journey of Joseph. We'll see him go from Joseph, the dreamer, and Joseph, the beloved son, to, in this chapter, we'll see him tonight go to Joseph, the slave. Here's what it says in verse 12. His brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers, you know, are pasturing the flocks at Shechem. Get ready, I'm sending you to them." "I'm ready," Joseph replied. Then Israel said to him, "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem. A man found him there, wandering in the field, and asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph said. "Can you tell me where they are pasturing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man said. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph set out after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Oh, look, here comes that dream expert. So now come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits or cisterns. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben also said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him," intending to rescue him from them and return him to his father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, without water. They sat down to eat a meal, and when they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin, going down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone. What am I going to do?" So they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped it in blood. the robe in its blood. They sent the robe of many colors to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it. Is it your son's robe or not?" His father recognized it. "It is my son's robe," he said. "A vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." And his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guards. And so, here we have this beginning of Joseph and his journey, and it starts there in the Hebron Valley and goes to Shechem, then to Dothan, and then a pit, and then on to Egypt. I thought that's appropriate, really, because what we're going to see is this journey of Joseph, right, throughout the end of the chapter. And he goes on quite a bit of a journey here in chapter 37. Now, his father said, it says that his brothers are out with the sheep at Shechem. Remember, Shechem is where the events took place of Dinah's rape, the subsequent slaughter of all the Shechemites. Jacob obviously owns some property there. He sends his boys back there to shepherd, to pasture the sheep. And then he sends Joseph, the second youngest, the 17-year-old brother, to go check up on his older brothers. And you read that and you go, why would you do that? That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. Jacob's out of touch, it seems, with the feelings of the older brothers because they absolutely hate and despise Joseph. It's the favoritism of the father, Jacob, that is fueling their jealousy and their rage towards Joseph, and Jacob doesn't even see it. As a matter of fact, it's probably that same favoritism that is creating in Joseph this arrogance that he has. Jacob is setting up Joseph for failure by bad parenting. Right? I mean, when you are told your whole life that you're perfect and you're the best and you're special, you believe it. And you go out into the world and you get crushed by the world, right? The best thing I think a parent can do for a child is to teach them their place in the world. Now, I don't know how to do this. Don't ask me how. I struggle with that, right? As a parent, I want my girls to be confident and capable, right? That's what you want your kids to be. You want them to be able to do everything and believe like, hey, if it's hard, I can put my mind to it and I can do it. You know, I can figure it out. I can think it through. I can find some resources. I can get it done. You want them to be confident, but at the same time, you want them to be humble. Humble. And so part of the problem is the way Jacob is treating Joseph is making the brothers feel a certain way. It's also making Joseph act a certain way, which makes the brothers feel that jealousy even more and more and more. And so it's really a perfect storm. And so Joseph goes on this journey, and once again, you got to ask why. This is not you don't send the little brother to go check up on the big brothers. He already gave a bad report in the first couple of verses of chapter 37 of the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, and they got mad about that. And so he's going to do it again. He set them up for that again, and he sends them out there, and he goes to Shechem, and I just think it's so interesting. He gets to Shechem, and the brothers aren't there. Well, there's no cell phones, right? Like there's no GPS. I mean, there's no way for him to find those brothers. So what's he going to do? He's wandering around and he can't find them. He's going to wander around a little while. This is what should happen. And then he's just going to go home and say, Dad, I looked for them in Shechem. They weren't there. But that doesn't happen, does it? Because why? Because while he's wandering around a field, remember, we're in the middle of nowhere here, a man sees him and comes up to him and says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm looking for my brothers. And he goes, well, I just so happen to know your brothers, and I know where they went. They went to Dothan. Now, Shechem's about 50 miles away from the Hebron Valley where his father was. Dotham's another 15 miles away. So Joseph could have wandered around forever and never ran into his brothers 15 miles away. But isn't it good luck that guy just happens to be there? How lucky, right? Isn't that great? I don't know, in that moment, he might have thought so. He might have been thinking, right? Just put yourself in his place like, oh my goodness, how awesome is that? I ran into this total stranger and he tells me where my brothers are at. Isn't that great? Not knowing what's waiting for him when he finds his brothers. And I just thought about that. Oftentimes we just stumble through life. We don't know how things are going to work out and how things are going to end. We just see what's right in front of us. And isn't it true that oftentimes something seems like a blessing and then in the end you realize it wasn't a blessing? And sometimes something might seem like a curse. Why is this happening to me? And at the end of the story you realize it was actually a blessing. There's an old, and you might have heard this, I think I read it on Facebook or something, but it's an old Chinese proverb they say about a farmer who had a son. And they had a stallion, a horse that they used for working and to earn a living, and one day the horse ran away. And so the neighbors say, oh, that's bad luck, your horse ran away. And the father says, well, maybe so, maybe not, we'll see. And a few days later the horse comes back, and it brings with him 3 or 4 wild horses that come back to the farm. And the neighbors say, look at all these free horses you just got. That's good luck. And the farmer says, well, maybe so, maybe not. A couple days later, the son is trying to break one of those wild horses. He's thrown from the horse, and his leg is broken. And the neighbor goes, oh, man, I'm sorry. Bad luck. Your son's leg got broken. The farmer says, well, maybe so, maybe not. A couple weeks later, the local conscription officer from the army comes by, rounding up young men to go fight in the army, and they pass over this young man because he's got a broken leg. And the truth is, we just don't know, do we? And this Chinese proverb probably ascribes that to karma or whatever, good luck or whatever. But what we see here is the providential hand of God steering situations and circumstances. And they might seem coincidental, but they're not. And this stranger, who is he? We don't know his name. We don't know anything else about him. Just a guy out in the woods, out in the field somewhere. And we know who he is, right? He is an agent of the providential God. God has sent that man to tell Joseph where to go. Where to go. And so he does. But I just thought, man, if you're in his situation, you would think, well, how lucky I am to be in that situation. And you never know. You never know if something, when it happens, if it's going to be a good thing or not a good thing. And sometimes maybe we get a new promotion, a new job. Maybe we get a new house. We get a new vehicle. We get a new whatever. You think, oh, I'm so lucky. But is that thing going to drag you farther away from God? Is it going to cause a problem in your family? You just need to be careful evaluating things in your life, and you never know how they are going to turn out. And so you ought to be aware of that. So Joseph finds his brothers there in Dothan, and they see him coming. How do they know it's him? Got that fancy coat on, right? You got that long sleeve coat of many colors. And you can see that from a long way off. There's nobody else dressed quite like that out there in the desert shepherding sheep. That's not a working man. That's a manager, right? You can see the manager coming from a long way. And so they plot. They plot against him. And here's what they say. It says that they saw him from a distance, and before they had reached him, they plotted to kill him. And they said to one another, here comes that dreamer, that dream expert. And so the plan is, okay, we're going to kill him, we're going to hide his body in a pit, and then we're going to tell Dad a wild animal killed him. So that's the scheme as they walk up, right? I mean, nowadays this would be on 48 hours or cold case file. I don't know, something like that, right? But here's the scenario. Here's the plot. They're going to commit murder. That's the plan. And they seem so casual about it. I mean, how can they be so casual about murdering somebody, anybody, but especially their own flesh and blood? How can they be so casual? I mean, they throw them in the pit, and then what do? They sit down to eat a meal. Right? I mean, if you got a big appointment in life, or you've got something you're thinking about, stressing about, are you hungry for a meal? Doesn't the first thing that goes away is your appetite? Maybe the first thing goes away is your ability to sleep at night, and then the second thing is your appetite. I don't know, but they're so casual. They're fine with it. They're completely comfortable killing their brother. Why are they so comfortable killing their brother? I think it goes back to what happened the last time we were in Shechem with Dinah. Remember when they went into Shechem and they slaughtered all the males of that village? and they enslaved the women and children and looted their stuff. I mean, it was Simeon and Levi, but it says the other brothers came and got the loot, and they enslaved the people. See, I think they've become comfortable with killing because they've done it before. They're comfortable with the idea. Isn't it true that you're more comfortable with something that's familiar to you? That's true, right? That's simple and obviously just an obvious principle. And the point I want to make of that is, if you never do it, you'll never be comfortable doing it. Isn't that true? So if you never go down that road, you won't be comfortable going down that road of sin, whatever the sin might be. If you just stay off the road, you'll never be familiar with it. But once you become familiar with that sin, it's easier to go back to it. And this is true even if we're talking about sins you maybe have committed before you came to Christ. You need to be aware of that. If you've been down that road, it's going to be easier for you to do that same sin or go down that same road again. And I think that's here. Most of us, if we decided to murder somebody, right, that would be so foreign to us. We couldn't even imagine doing that, and we'd overthink it. We certainly wouldn't be comfortable enough to sit down and eat a meal and talk about it. But they've done it before, and now it's not that big of a deal for them. Now, a lot of older brothers have thought about killing their little brothers, maybe even planned it out, but very few of them actually do it, and they are going to do it. Now, Reuben speaks up. Now, remember, Reuben's the oldest brother. He intervenes. He says, guys, let's don't actually kill him, okay? Let's just throw him in one of these pits and forget about him, And in his mind, he's like, that's great. I'll just talk them into doing that, and then I'll circle back when they're not looking. I'll save him and take him back to Dad. Now, we know a little bit about Reuben, don't we? Reuben's been a bad boy. Reuben's the firstborn. He should be the heir, but he's not the heir. How come? He slept with one of his father's wives, his stepmother, or the maidservant of one of his father's wives. And so maybe his thought is, I need some points with Dad. You know what I mean? If I save the favorite son from getting killed, maybe me and Dad will be back on good terms. Maybe I can be the heir again. Maybe, whatever. But his brothers don't listen to him. And it seems like maybe Reuben has lost his influence with his brothers, maybe because of his actions and what he did. And so I think the big problem he tries to make here is he's going to try to trick a trickster. Isn't that true? If you're not a trickster, don't try to trick a trickster because they'll out-trick you. So he's thinking, I'll trick them. I'll just circle back later. But they're trickier than he is. And he's absent at part of this. So he's not present, it doesn't seem, for the little slave trade and the selling of the brother that takes place. And they don't listen to Reuben, but they do listen to Judah. Now, Judah is the fourth oldest. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Judah is the one that's going to inherit the promise. It's Judah who says, let's don't kill him. Let's sell him. Now, you can look at this in kind of two different ways, right? And commentators do that. Sometimes commentators will say, well, Judah was just thinking about making money. That's all he cared about. He was thinking, look, this is a business opportunity. Let's don't waste it. Let's have it as an opportunity to make some profit off it. He didn't care about his brother. And then others will say, some commentators will say, no, this is actually Judah doing the only thing he could to intervene and save the life of Joseph. And they'll say this is why he inherits the promise, because of this moment when he saves Joseph. Now, chapter 38 is not going to paint Judah in a very good light. We'll see that next week. But some people say that, and so I don't know. It is true, Jesus is the line of the tribe of Judah, not the line of the tribe of Joseph, okay? So you have to kind of deal with that a little bit as a faithful Bible student. What's happening here? Maybe that's what's going on. And so, coincidentally, they look up, and what is it? A caravan of Ishmaelites. These are referred to as Midianites and Ishmaelites simultaneously, different times, and they're called both those things. And so, they're not sitting on the side of a highway, all right? They haven't pulled over the car at a busy intersection to eat a sandwich. Okay, Okay, they are in the middle of nowhere. And they're in the process of plotting and scheming to kill their brother. And it just so happens that a caravan comes back past them, headed towards Egypt. Isn't that a coincidence? No, we understand what's going on, right? This is once again God's providence. God is working this way. It's just like the stranger out in the middle of nowhere that tells Joseph to go to Dothan. We see God at work here. We're going to kill him. And then suddenly, there's a means of escape. And not just a means of escape, a means of transport to Egypt, where God is going to use Joseph to save all of the rest of Jacob's family. And so suddenly, they look up, and there he is, this group. So they sell him. They sell him for 20 pieces of silver, and then Reuben comes back. Reuben comes back and discovers that Joseph's gone. Okay, and he seems very upset. He tears his clothes. Oh, no. But you got to be a little bit skeptical of Reuben, because you know what Reuben doesn't do? Reuben doesn't go tell Israel what happened. He participates in the cover-up, doesn't he? And so you got to question, what did Reuben know? What did Reuben think happened? When he came back and Joseph's gone, what did he think happened? Did he think his brothers had killed him? What did he think? And if he thought his brothers had killed him, why didn't he go tell his father that? If he knew that Joseph had been sold off into slavery, just think about how this story could have changed. If Reuben would have gone home and said, Dad, I was against it, I tried to save him, but the boys sold Joseph into slavery and they're headed to Egypt right now, what would Jacob have done? What would you do if that was your son? You'd go to Egypt, right? You would spend your last dollar, your last ounce of strength, am I right? To go get your child back out of your 17-year-old boy. You would do whatever it took to get him back. You would search all of Egypt. You'd pay any price to go get him back, am I right? And so Reuben could have saved Joseph from slavery if he knew that's the case. Some point out that there's 20 pieces of silver and 10 brothers. That splits up pretty nice, doesn't it? That splits up pretty nice. So maybe he got a little cut of the action and participated in this cover-up. And later on in Genesis chapter 42, here's what he says. Once they're back, once they go to Egypt and they're in front of Joseph and they don't even know it, y'all know the story probably. And Joseph's giving him a little bit of a hard time, right? He's kind of frustrating him a little bit. And they say this. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. This is 20 years later, by the way. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not recognize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. So Reuben may think that Joseph's dead, or, the truth is 20 years later, people didn't live long as slaves in those days. It was a hard life. So the likelihood that a slave would be alive still in Egypt 20 years later, very, very unlikely. And so Reuben is not exactly the good guy here because he participates in the cover-up. Judah's not a good guy for sure. The only good guy is Joseph, and he's sold into slavery. Verse 33, they put this blood on this robe, and they send it back to Jacob. And it's absolutely gut-wrenching when you know what's going on here. He says, it is my son's robe. I mean, in that moment, Jacob realizes that his child has been killed and he's never going to see him again. I mean, it's an absolutely gut-wrenching moment. If you're a parent, you can certainly sympathize with him. And what's incredible to me is, it says, all the children came to Jacob to try to comfort him, but he could not be comforted. He was inconsolable. He says, I won't be comforted. until I go down to Sheol. I will go down to Sheol, that's like the grave. I will go down to my death, mourning. I will mourn my son until the day I die. That's what Jacob says. That's how obliterated he is. And the brothers watch that. And they selfishly keep their mouth shut, knowing that he's still alive. He could be saved. Their hatred for their brother is stronger than their love for their father. They are so selfish that they're willing to watch their father suffer just to have gotten rid of an annoyance in their life. Whew. Unimaginable. Not to mention the guilt that Jacob must have felt. I mean, who sent Joseph on that journey by himself? Wasn't it Jacob? I mean, how many times did Jacob probably think to himself, well, I should never have sent him to Shechem. It's my fault. If I had just kept him here, why did I even send him? I should have stayed home. He had to go through all that hurt and all those emotions because of these selfish sons. They saw him go through it. At any point in this whole time, any one of the 10 boys could have said, listen, Dad, I'm so sorry. Joseph's alive. He's in Egypt. We got to go down there and find him, but he's not dead. And none of them do it. Selfish. Well, how do we get here? How do we get to murder among brothers? It's got to be one of the worst crimes imaginable when a brother kills another brother. Well, I want to submit to you tonight that it all started with jealousy and envy of Joseph. Now, it's fueled by the favoritism of the father, fueled by the arrogance of Joseph, certainly. But it's that old green-eyed monster, I think Shakespeare called it. Envy, jealousy. I want that love from Dad. I am jealous. The Bible talks a lot about it. Let me give you a verse here. James chapter 3 says in verse 14, but if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast about it and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder, and listen, and every evil practice. Great example of that passage, right? Murder. I mean, the most atrocious of sins that came from envy and jealousy. So it goes on, I'll just finish that little section. But the wisdom from above is, first of all, pure, peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruit, unwavering, and without pretense. Galatians chapter 5, this is the fruit of the flesh, the works of the flesh. The works of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, promiscuity, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, envy. You see those three? Drunkenness, carousing, and anything similar. And I'm warning you about these things, as I warned you before, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. That's what it says in Galatians. And to an extent, when you think about envy and jealousy, since both those are mentioned, envy is actually even worse than jealousy. See, jealousy says, I want what you have. But envy is a step more than that. Envy says, I don't want you to have what you have. I want you to lose what you have. I want you to have less. And so, how should we live then? What's the opposite of envy and jealousy? Romans chapter 12 says, rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Celebrate with people who have good things. Not be envious and jealous of them. And so far in the book of Genesis, we've seen this envy and jealousy a couple of times, right? Already, going all the way back to Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel. Why? He's jealous. He gives a subpar sacrifice, and God doesn't accept it, but God does accept Abel's sacrifice, and so Cain, out of his jealousy, kills Abel. We've also seen it with Rachel and Leah, right? That jealousy that jealousy. Jacob favored Rachel, and it caused this intense jealousy, and it caused Rachel and Leah to argue back and forth, and all kinds of dysfunction arose in their family. And so, certainly, envy and jealousy lead to all kinds of evil practices. It'll cause you to do all kinds of evil things, even to the extent of murder. And if it doesn't get you that far, if you're able to just keep it inside your heart and don't let it get out to your hands and commit some crime or some act about it, the problem is that it is absolutely the opposite of love. You are not loving somebody if you're jealous of them and envious of them. You can't. And if the command then is for us to love, we cannot do that if we are envious and jealous of them. And so you see this envy, and I told you last week, envy, jealousy, it just grows. Be careful. When you start feeling it in your heart, in your spirit, you better put a lid on it. You better get a hold of it because it grows. And it's like a splinter. It just festers, and that wound gets infected and worse and worse and worse. You better put a squash on it as soon as you can because it grows and gets worse and worse and worse. And that's actually true about all sin. All sin. We see these guys, right? Plotting. That's the first crime they committed. They're in their hearts. They've already killed Joseph. That was their scheme. And they bind him. They throw him in a pit. And actually in verse 42, or chapter 42 that I read, says that he cried out. Can you imagine him crying out for his life? But anyways, they throw him in a pit. They sell him into slavery. You see, it's getting worse, right? And then what do? They lie about it. And they cover it up. And every time they see their dad crying because he believes his son is dead, they are guilty of that lie over and over again because they refuse to tell the truth. It just grows. In James, another verse in James says, but each person is tempted when they're drawn away and enticed by his own evil desire. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. In this case, it was the death of Joseph, their brother. Well, let me give you one last thought and we'll close this evening. Joseph is sold off into slavery. He's betrayed by his brothers for 20 pieces of silver. He's betrayed for 20 pieces of silver. Does that ring a bell? Does that sound familiar? Know anybody else that was betrayed for some silver? Yeah, absolutely. Jesus was betrayed by not a brother, but a disciple, pretty close, for 30 pieces of silver. And so I told you last week, there's a lot of these ways that we kind of see these comparisons between Joseph and Jesus. And I think the way we see it here is all these events that take place in chapter 37, the stranger that just happens to be there to direct him to Dothan, the caravan of Midianites that just happens to be passing through during the murder plot, is all part of the providential hand of God. Now, he didn't cause these men to commit this sin against Joseph. He didn't endorse their sin. He's not okay with their sin, but they're sinning, and he is weaving a storyline. He's using what their wicked, evil intentions are to ultimately accomplish his purposes, which are good. That's exactly what God does in the Gospels with Jesus. He uses the wicked intentions of evil men to accomplish his purpose. In Acts chapter 2, verse 23, it says, though he was delivered up according to God's determined plan and foreknowledge, you used lawless people to nail him to a cross and kill him. It was God's determined plan and foreknowledge. He knew what they were going to do. He used even their wicked schemes to accomplish his ultimate good and his ultimate purpose, our salvation. And that's good news. That's good news in a wicked world because people sin against you. And evil people do bad things to you. You could amen if you want. Right? Anybody? You ever been in a pit? I remember my mom, when I was a kid, used to say, oh, that's the pits. Anybody say that? That's the pits. That's what I always say. Literally, right, for Joseph here. Yeah, you've been in a pit. But listen, even in the pit, God's providential hand is at work in your life. And they meant it for evil, certainly. But God is able to use it to accomplish His purpose and for good in your life. So you can be bitter against those people, or you can trust that God's got it all under control. Amen? Let's close. God, we love you.